Thank you all for your patience. We will now get going. I call this meeting of the South Whitby School District School Board to order. We will begin with our land acknowledgement and then move directly on into what we need to do tonight. Director Jackson.
Thank you. We live, work, and gather on the ancestral lands of the Coast Salish people, the tribes collectively affiliated with the Tulalip tribes, the Stillaguamish, Suquamish, Lower Skagit, Tulalip, and Swinomish people. And we honor their deep ancestral ties to this land, their long stewardship of this place, these waters, these plant and animal communities with whom we make home. Please join us in expressing our gratitude to the Indigenous peoples of this land, generations gone and generations present, generations yet to come, and honoring our enduring care and protection that they have offered to this place that now benefits the many communities that make their homes here today. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We will note this is a business meeting, so there is an opportunity for public comment. If you would like to make public comment, please speak to Ms. Macaro in the back and sign up. You'll have 5 minutes each. I will note that this board did just return from a 30-minute executive session to discuss student representative application qualifications. No action was taken during that executive session, and we will be going into executive session at the end of this meeting for no more than 1 hour to discuss the performance of a public employee. Lots of executive sessions. Are there any objections to approving the agenda and minutes as presented? Hearing none, the agenda and minutes are approved as presented. We'll now move on to our vote for our new student board member. Audrey has served 2 full years here on the school board and has enormously grown the role and risen to every challenge and occasion, in my opinion. And we've been incredibly lucky to have her as a student representative on this board. We'll go more in depth in showering her with praise at our next meeting, but I just wanted to get that out there. So we are appointing someone to take her seat. The person that we appoint will join us up on the dais for this meeting and will be welcome to comment and vote, comment and provide advisory votes during this meeting as well. We will do a roll call vote, but first I want to thank the 4 candidates who put themselves forward. It's never easy to step forward and say, I'll help with that. And particularly not when you're sitting in front of a selection of school board members as a student and answering questions, and all 4 candidates did an amazing job, both with their applications and their interviews. And we have 4 amazing candidates. I don't believe that any of us think that this vote is easy. We'll move on. This will be a roll call vote. We'll start with our advisory votes from our student representatives and then move on in order of length of time serving on the board, with the board chair voting last. So when I call your name, please state first the advisory vote and then the vote for the voting members of the person you would like to take the student representative position. Katya.
Carter.
Audrey.
Carter McKnight.
Joe.
Carter McKnight.
Emil.
Anne.
Carter.
Andrea.
Kirsty.
And my vote is for Carter McKnight as well. Thank you all again for, we have a majority. Thank you all for coming forward and putting yourself out there. We very much want to keep all 4 of you engaged in this process. And we want to give explicit invitations to the Superintendent's Advisory Council, to the 3 members who were not selected, the 3 applicants who were not selected. We want to keep hearing your voices and want to keep you involved in the direction of this district. Thank you very much. Carter, would you come up and we would like to swear you in?
hand. Stand up. Stand up. Use the mic. Your first opportunity. Look at me. Ready? I
I,
name,
Carter McKnight,
do solemnly swear
do solemnly swear
that I will support the Constitution of the United States,
that I will support the Constitution of the United States
the Constitution of the State of Washington,
and the Constitution of the State of Washington,
and will faithfully discharge the duties
and will faithfully discharge the duties
of School Board Representative for South Whidbey School District.
what?
School Board Representative for South Whidbey School District,
School Board Representative for South Woodby School District
to the best of my ability.
to the best of my ability.
Congratulations.
Welcome to the board. Are there any objections to approving the consent agenda as presented? Hearing none, the consent agenda is approved as presented. We have a presentation tonight. I will first turn it over to Dr. Moshe to introduce the presentation.
I'm going to ask Emmy Atwood to come on up and take the mic, and she will be presenting to you on the community survey that was done. Emmy is our school nurse, teacher, practitioner, and nurse manager, and has come off a couple of years of COVID and done such an outstanding job. Welcome, Emmy. Thank you for being here.
Oh, green light. Green light's better. Thank you for giving us time on your agenda tonight. And actually, I'm going to introduce Sean Morris, who is our Island County Public Health Director, who will be actually reviewing, sharing with us results from the community needs assessment around school-based health centers. So you may recall last year we entered in a partnership for a grant application for planning and implementation of a school-based health center. This is a conversation that's more than a decade old. Neighboring communities are working with this model as a way to overcome the barriers of access to care that school and public health partnerships. And so the volume of this conversation has increased over the last couple of years with more funding opportunities. And while we did not receive that first round of funding, we're hopeful that there will be more to come and want to continue that conversation. So tonight is one step in this community-wide partnership to help with access to care, basically, and the school's role in that. So these were, well, I'll just turn it over to Sean Morris, Island County Public Health Director. Thank you.
Can you, oh, is that on? Great. Hi, thank you for having us today. So this project has been ongoing. We've been working with Emmy and as well as the Coopville School District in Oak Harbor and folks in Camino. For this survey, we centered on Coopville and South Whidbey school districts. And we've been trying to understand as if there's a need for school-based care in our communities as we think about challenges around access to care for children and families. And there's a lot here on the slides. We don't have time to go through it all, so we'll just kind of skip through and try to grab the takeaways. You can go to next slide, please. Next slide. Really quickly, school-based health center, it's a clinic essentially within a school district. It can provide behavioral health, physical health, some combination. It can be a brick and mortar facility. It could be a telehealth relationship with a local provider. You can go to next slide. And we'll skip through this one. Here's a map of school-based health centers in Washington. We've been working with the Washington School-Based Health Alliance, which is a state nonprofit, to guide some of the work and help develop surveys and approaches. And go to next slide. And we'll skip this one as well. So yeah, we'll quickly go through. Island County is a medically underserved area. In general, we fall below the state in access to primary care in particular. We have gaps, critical gaps with access to outpatient behavioral health services. We have some uninsured residents who face additional barriers to care, and our access to care is a bit below the state for our Medicaid enrolled children and families, or Apple Health families. And next slide. We'll skip this one. And this just shows some of the challenges around access to care. We're close, but a bit below state averages. Next. And we'll skip this one. Okay, so the survey we did, it was a partnership, worked with EMU, the school nurses and staff. We wanted to understand from the student and family and staff perspective if there was a need for school-based services in our communities. Go next. We adapted surveys using resources from that nonprofit, as well as regional organizations who have planned school-based care, particular in Skagit County, Mount Vernon, and Cedar-Woolley school districts. And we've had been getting resources from a number of different counties and public health departments across the state. We go next. We had decent response. We had 209 people respond, a lot of students and then staff, not as many parents or caregivers. And we had responses grades 9 through 12. And this is really the key information for today. What we took away from this and what we're seeing in other data is, we see anxiety, stress, depression is ranked as top conditions by students and staff. We're seeing that in our Healthy Youth Survey data and their ongoing discussions around limited outpatient behavioral health resources for our students. Next. But we also find, headaches, colds and fevers, sore throats, stomach aches, variety of conditions that might warrant a visit to the primary care doctor. We are seeing those come up and as common reasons that students are missing class time. Next. So we had some feedback from our students. We collected some survey responses. We also had a place where students and parents and staff could give comments. And we've had some students share their perspective on challenges they've had accessing care. We had one student say, I think this is something that would be very helpful because a lot of students or teens in general have a hard time setting up doctor's appointments for various reasons. A lot more than you would like have never been to the dentist, and a lot don't get counseling, mostly due to not feeling confident enough to ask. And some comments from our staff as well around stress and anxiety becoming increasingly common at even the elementary school level, and concerns about, well, looks like concerns about gaining weight, changing bodies. But we had a lot of feedback, and we can go next. Our takeaways are really that focusing on the behavioral health component, thinking about this work going forward, we're bringing this together. We'd like to form an advisory group, and we're continuing to do outreach to providers. We've had conversations with the Educational Service District and our Human Services Department, who has a community-based mental health program, and how we can interface with the schools and think about addressing some of the needs we're seeing locally. But really the next step would be to form an advisory committee that could help us think about this information and think about appropriate next steps. Next slide. That summarizes it there, but yeah, an advisory board and, identifying, I think with a board, with a community board, we can think about approaching different providers. We've had some outreach already we actually don't have a federally qualified health center in Island County that can provide services, but we're talking with the ESD. I know South Whidbey School District is working with the ESD on increased mental health services. And like I mentioned, are integrating with our community-based mental health program that doesn't provide mental health services in the schools, but is available through our Human Services Department. And then thinking about outreach to providers, if this is something the community would like to pursue. And some of that is underway. We've had meetings with CMAR, Whidbey Health, some of our regional federally qualified health centers like Neighbor Care, and we're continuing to share information and have conversations. So I'll open it up to questions, and really the goal is to get as much community input as we can on this project.
Just like to put a note out there that since this is a business meeting, we can really only get comments from the board, questions from the board, but if members of the audience and community have questions, how can they get those questions to you?
Yeah, if maybe I can share my email with the board, and my email is available on the county website. If you just Google Island County Public Health, you can contact Sean. Yeah.
Thank you. Are there any questions from the board?
What are the pathways to fund a program like this, either through grants or otherwise?
So it varies county to county. In Jefferson County, where they have a robust school-based program, they have a number of clinics in most of their schools. They fund by billing insurance for visits, a combination of funding, and from that, also from the hospital district. There's grant funding available, like Emmy and I applied for. The county has limited funding for planning and doing the community convening work for this. But yeah, a partnership of bringing together different sources of public funds typically.
I just want to thank you for the work you've done on this. As from the first time this came up, this sounds like a fantastic way to better serve our students and staff and give our students a better feel of belonging if they're healthy at school or can get their concerns seen to at school. So thank you very much for the work being put in on this.
Thank you for your time. Thank you.
I've got one more question, kind of branching off of that. Is there research that shows improved student outcomes in schools that have a program like this versus, I know it's hard to have a control in a study like that.
Yeah, there is actually quite a bit of research, and the nonprofit has kind of a research bibliography, but it's a very evidence-based way, particularly in rural communities where there are geographic barriers to receiving care, to bring the care to where our populations are. So yes, lots of research on outcomes, decreased absences, improved academic performance. And services can show up in different ways, and that's something we're hoping to get more input on, and what level of services, what types of services would be well received by the community.
Thank you.
I have a quick question. As you think about what a community advisory group might look like, do you imagine that would include representatives from Coupeville and South Whidbey school districts, or would that be a South Whidbey focus?
For this project, and we're hoping for representation from Coupeville and South Whidbey.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for your time.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Okay, those are all of our presentations for tonight. Thank you very much to both of you for coming in and speaking with us. We'll move on to public comments. If you're in the room and would like to comment, please speak with Ms. Macaro. If you are in the Zoom, we have 6 attendees on the Zoom besides those of us up on the dais here. If you'd like to make a comment and you're on the Zoom, please use the Q&A function to note your name and your location. General location is fine. We don't need an explicit address. And just put that in there first, just so we know that there's a question, or a comment, sorry, not a question. And then start typing your comment. I will read any comment that comes in as long as it follows our policies on addressing actions rather than people. That's really the key. We want to afford both those speaking and receiving the comment with dignity and respect. And so we want to make sure that we welcome criticism, but it needs to be about actions, not people. So any of those who are here in person?
Turn this down here. All right, is that good? All right, my name is Laura Davenport, and I'm here on behalf of the ALE program. That's what I'd like to talk about. I am an educator. I'm also a parent to 2 current ALE students. Next year, they will be in the 2nd grade and the 6th grade, so 2 different parts of the program. ALE has been an amazing way for our family to stay in the district. We have received accommodations that both my daughters require that cannot be met in a normal school setting. And so ALE has allowed us to be a part of a community that we really cherish and that we really needed after COVID, excuse me. We wouldn't be part of the district without their participation in this program. I am here to speak because I'm very disheartened about the cuts to the program that we recently heard about. I would like our district to do more to make sure that this program continues to thrive and that it's available to all the families on its long wait lists. Research has shown over and over again that the most effective, lasting type of learning is both experiential and interest-based. And this holds true for both academics as well as social emotional. The more senses that we use and the more hands-on opportunities we can offer, the more autonomy we can give to the kids, the deeper their understanding will be. Although in its infancy, ALE is currently demonstrating these exact qualities. It's a model for the future of schooling. And as a community, we should be putting all we can towards helping it to thrive. It would be a mistake to look over this program as just another alternative learning experience. In fact, our town has an opportunity to demonstrate how public schools can successfully bridge the gap between the larger public school system and the smaller individual learning needs of all different types of students and families. The ALE community has a lot of potential, but we need the backing of our leaders on the board. And I also just wanted to comment on the previous presentation and just note that they were saying that we are the biggest problems we're seeing is mental health issues. And a program like this is it's a preventative program for those exact issues. And I think it's really important to make that connection that we have this going on and how well it's already going in our district. And that's it. Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much for sharing that.
Hi, I'm also here to talk about ALE. I have questions, but I know you guys can't answer them today. But as you know, ALE has a wait list. I was curious to know if anyone has been in communication with the waitlisted families. Do we know how many of the kids would be new to the district? Do we know how many have left or plan to leave the district if they're not able to join the program? With so much interest in this program, why was the decision made to reduce certificated teaching time by 30%? Without teaching time, we can't grow the program. I personally know people who've been on the wait list for more than a year. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing that. For those who do have questions, if you want to email in, we'll get answers to those questions. Email into, if it's about ALE, I would suggest Ms. Richards as the program director.
Hi, my name is Amanda Pitts. I'm also representing the ALE program. I have 3 boys in the program. I like to think of myself as like the biggest ALE cheerleader. I love the program so much. I have a son in each of the 3 age ranges. I also have worked as a contractor, as the volunteer coordinator. And so I've seen a lot of the needs and also so much of the wealth of this program. My biggest concern is the teaching hours. As they have said, I think thinking about it in the way that we have had this year, 3 1.0 teachers taking over these kids, and we're going down to 2.8s to do the reporting, plus a 0.4 teacher to also help teach. That's a huge limit on our program. Also a huge strain on our teachers who are now taking on the reporting of students that 3 full-time teachers were previously reporting. That's time that our teachers are going to be focusing on that instead of on our kids. And I think that the biggest disservice we can do to this program is to take back our teaching hours. This is a huge grade range. We're asking essentially 2.8s and 1.4 teacher to teach 1st through 8th grade students. That's a huge gap. We're asking a lot of parents help, and we love that. We're such a community, we're such a family-based program, and I love that. But it's hard to ask parents to come in and teach and be there for free all the time when we all have jobs and things that we're doing also. We want the community to be there because we want to be there, and not because in order to keep our community running, we have to be there. I just think our teachers that we have in this program are so spectacular, and I just want to see them thrive, and I want to see them want to be here because we're making it worth their time. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Hello, my name is Denise Bachentine, and I'm also here about the ALE program. I have 2 children in the district, a 5th grader who's currently doing well mainstreaming, and a 2nd grader who is in the ALE. And we came from Calix and then homeschooled throughout the pandemic, and the ALE gave us the opportunity to join the district. And I can say without a doubt that my 2nd grader would not be enrolled in the school district if the ALE weren't available. He cannot, his needs would not be met in a traditional classroom. And now I'm gonna choke up. But the way that his social and emotional growth has skyrocketed in the last year has been tremendous to watch. The fact that he has a place where he is totally accepted and totally supported, where he has friends and where he's learning, it's really incredible. So with the loss of teachers, for 6 o'clock today, they put out the email for re-enrollment, and I was waiting on the phone because I have to compete for a spot with the other parents in order to get my kid into the program, knowing that some of his friends might not get in, and we've got dozens and dozens of people on the wait list whose kids need this type of programming, and it's evidence-based. I mean, this is where we're going with education. This is the best quality of education. The progress, I volunteer in the classroom on a weekly basis, and I'm with these kids all the time. And I also work with some kids in the traditional classrooms. And I can't even tell you the difference between the behavior and the ability to self-regulate and regulate as a group between the ALE kids and the traditional classroom. It is a marked difference. And these are the kids who are enrolled because they struggle with that shit. And yet they're doing better at it because the way that they're being taught, the way that they're being invited to create their own, they call them agreements. We don't have rules. They have agreements, and they participate in the development of agreements, and they hold each other to them, and they learn how to do that with respect. They learn how to resolve conflict. They learn how to treat each other. And then when I work with kids, unfortunately, who are in a more traditional model, often coming from more traditional households, I'll also say, those kids are struggling. It is so much harder to help them to come together and to create the type of discussions and the type of learning that we can see. So I really want to see more teaching hours, more support for the program, so that we can continue to serve more children and continue to grow what I see as the future of education, and give options for other families whose children are struggling with the traditional model to be able to thrive and to learn these same skills and to grow and to believe in themselves, where the traditional model tends to teach them that they are a bad person who's incapable of participating in a way that is constructive. And so thank you. Thank you for the support that's been given so far to the program. And And please continue to push for it to move forward.
Thank you for sharing that. And I'm very glad that your son is getting that growth.
Well, it looks like maybe some more decisions are going to be made for the coming school year. My comments relate to this last school year. To our superintendent, school board representatives, student board representatives, principals, administration staff, teachers, para-educators, coaches, parent volunteers, cafeteria staff, maintenance staff, school bus drivers, and all other employees of the South Whidbey School District. Thank you for giving your incredible expertise, your amazing dedication, and your beautiful hearts to the education of our children. Thank you. Thank you so much for what you do. And this is on behalf of grateful parents, grandparents, great-grandparents, and from me, the sign lady.
Thank you for sharing that. And I echo that our staff is amazing.
I'm here as well to talk about the ALE program. I used to be in the, I have my kids, 2 kids in the Orcas Island ALE program. And when the ALE program started here, every year I did the choice transfer and I was like, if you have an ALE, I'm switching my kids. And when it started, here I was. The kids were enrolled and they've been so happy. Last week, I told my kid, I was like, it's sunny. Do you want to go to the lake and go swim? And he said, no, I'm going to class. So it was really, it's so good. And when I saw that there was only the 2.0 hours assigned to the ALE program, I was really sad. And I know it's finances is difficult and it's really hard, but for this program to thrive, we need more. And I'm just here to say that the work that's been done on this program is amazing. I went to visit some other ones, the one in Edmonds, I went to visit the one in Bellingham, and we're kicking butt. Ours is so small and so new and so amazing already what the kids are doing and learning. And just so excited to be there. And I just wanted to continue. And for that, we need the teachers to be able to do the work and do it well. And we need a bit more. So I'm just here to say, please work on trying to get us more. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing that.
My name is Jen. I'm here also on behalf of the ALE. You started it. Who started this? I was fine. One of the stated goals of this body to uphold equity in our district. Just completely break. I'm here to speak to equity. There are many children in this district who would not be a part of this community, a part of this district if it wasn't for ALE. I come from a household of 2 working parents. Again, this village to make sure that my daughter can be enrolled in ALE because it's the model that best suits her and her learning style. With the reduction that we're talking about in the staffing of ALE, it's unlikely that we would be in the district next year. I feel that this beautiful fledgling program is being cut off at the knees. We're going from 3.0 reporting teachers to 1.6. It feels like an impossible task to give to these teachers who are doing amazing work with a potentially challenging group of children who are thriving. And so I'm here to beg that you uphold the equity that this program is offering our community and our district. Please don't kick us out of the district. We really want to be here and be part of this community. In order to do so, we need more support, and that means more time for our teachers to do what they do best. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing that. Do we have any further? I do not see any on the Q&A. Dr. Moshe, you wanted to make a comment on something?
I do want to make a comment about ALE in particular and my work with Mrs. Richards. We actually spoke this week about the wait list and what we could do to address that wait list. And also want to reiterate that the budget is still a work in progress. And so no decisions have been made, though we have had to notify our least senior teachers. Right now, they are correct. We have 2 teachers assigned in FTE. Two of our teachers have been reduced. They are the least senior, but we are working on a plan. So we hear you.
Thank you. I don't see anything in the Q&A. Thank you all for sharing your experiences with the district and being vulnerable in public. I know that's hard to do. Thank you very much. We'll move on from public comments to our new business. We have 5 items on the agenda there. First is Memorandum 2223-39, approval of Resolution 673 WIAA membership renewal for 2023-2024. Director Greenherron, do you want to comment on this as our WIAA board rep?
I'd love to. The WIAA is the statewide body responsible for overseeing sports and other extracurriculars. Yearly, we renew our membership to it. And as a WIAA rep, I just want to make a brief comment and mention that of all the possible interventions that are correlated with better outcomes for students, sports and extracurriculars is the least expensive. And so in a time of tightening wallets and budget crunches, it's more important than ever that we give these opportunities to our students to work together as a team, to push themselves further and harder than they have before and realize what they're capable of. And sports and extracurriculars is the highest return on investment for enabling them to do so.
Is there any other comments or discussion from the board?
There are so many students in sports, so it's great that we're able to have this opportunity. And I know right now there's multiple sports teams at state, so it's great to see that not only are students participating in these sports, but they're also achieving great things.
Yeah, I'd also like to say that sports not only contribute to the physical health of students, but also the mental health and creating relationships with their fellow peers and teams. So it's a huge part of our district.
Carter, if you want to say something, we'll invite you to do so, but you don't feel like you need to because it's your first meeting. Anything else from?
I just want to acknowledge that in addition to sports, the additional intra-district opportunities. I know when I was a student enrolled, the speech and debate opportunities were really meaningful for me. So thank you to all of our athletes and scholars who participate in the programming that's afforded through a partnership like this one.
Okay, we'll reach out to our student representatives for an advisory vote. We'll have 3 advisory votes here for this meeting. So how do you advise we vote on this?
Aye.
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 Okay, all those in favor of approving Memorandum 2223-39, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, please say nay. Memorandum 2223-39 has been approved. Memorandum 2223-40, approval of the ELA curriculum. We had an entire workshop with an amazing presentation by Mrs. Phillips. Is there anything that you'd like to add to that at this point?
I think the hour and 20 last time sufficed.
Seriously, if you're interested at all in curriculum and didn't watch that, look at that presentation. It's on the agenda here tonight, and you can see the entire presentation on video on our YouTube channel also. It is amazing. Any other comments or questions on this?
I'm going to steal one of Marnie's lines and just say I would like to express gratitude to Ms. Phillips and to the entire curriculum adoption team for a very, very well done curriculum adoption.
I would also like to acknowledge that the reading material selection rubric that was developed seems like a really brilliant tool, and I look forward to the way that it and its use can evolve. I appreciate that it will become a living document that grows through the wisdom of incoming students and staff. Thank you.
I'm really excited to see where this program goes. I started one of the books last week and it's so far pretty good. So I'm excited to see more and to start some of the textbooks next year and doing my weekly Membean.
Yeah, I found the presentation at our last meeting very interesting, and it's exciting to see us switching our curriculum to fit 21st century learning in the interest of students.
I would just love a copy of the emerging book list so I can read all of them.
Yeah, I ended up with 3 or 4 pictures on my phone of book covers that I want to read as well.
This is a +1 to how thorough the presentation was. I had no idea that a curriculum presentation could be that good and how much work could go into it. My only question is, there were a couple items that were a little more work in progress. One was a rollout plan for scaling professional development, and then the other was interventions. I know it's only been a couple weeks, so I'm just curious if there's been any progress on either of those.
Susie and I are in back and forth emails right now with our rep from them, kind of waiting for your official vote for the K-5 specifically, and then what our plan is going to look like. We're looking at some opportunities in June, August, and then throughout the school year. So we're just kind of waiting on the green light to be able to start to officially put those on the calendar. And then regards to intervention, we have asked with more detail. They had 2 specific options for the gen ed classrooms, some opportunities. And so we want to dig a little deeper with their rep on what their recommendations is based off what they know about us as a district, and then questions from more teachers as they're starting to see that we're rolling this out, and then things that they bring up. So we're going to look at both of those in a little bit more depth in the next week or so.
Thank you.
And just a confirmation that this is not an explicit purchase order for a certain number of years. This is approving the curriculum, and the duration of the contract will be in the budget. Yes?
That's correct.
Just wanted to make sure that everyone was on the same page on what they're voting on. Thank you. Any other comments, questions? Okay, I'd love to get advisory votes from our student representatives.
Aye. Aye.
Aye.
All those in favor of approving Memorandum 2223-40, approval of the ELA curriculum, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, please say nay. Memorandum 2223-40 has been approved. We have an ELA curriculum going forward. Memorandum 2223-41, approval of the essential update to South Whitby School District Policy 3422, student sports, concussion, and head injuries. Andrea, I'm going to, as our policy rep, I'm going to pass this over to you for any additional comments.
I don't have any additional comments.
Yeah, we discussed this in the workshop 2 weeks ago. So
I would love to see an Oxford comma in the title.
Done.
any other comments or questions? I appreciate the Oxford comma too. Thank you. Okay, advisory votes on this memorandum.
Aye. Aye.
Aye.
Thank you very much. All those in favor of approving memorandum 2223-41, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, please say nay. Memorandum 2223-41 has been approved. Memorandum 2223-42, approval to retire South Louis School District Policy 5521 Teacher Assistance Program. Anything that we need to discuss on this one?
Not beyond what we discussed 2 weeks ago.
All right, advisor votes on this. Just wanted to note, since we have a new person, it is perfectly legitimate to abstain if you don't feel comfortable on what you're discussing.
Aye.
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 Okay, all those in favor of approving memorandum 2223-42, which would retire this policy, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, please say nay. Memorandum 2223-42 has been approved. The final memorandum on our agenda tonight, memorandum 2223-43, approval of the essential update to South Louis School District Policy 4060, distribution of information. This is another one that was discussed at the workshop. Anything to add or discuss? Okay, advisory votes, please.
Aye.
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 Thank you very much. All those in favor of approving memorandum 2223-43, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, please say nay. Memorandum 2223-43 has been approved. We'll move on to our reports and turn to Mr. Pullman for financial and enrollment report and discussion of the budget for 2023-24.
So we will start with our enrollment report as of May. Little spider, that's little. Currently, we have in our basic education program about 1,077 kids, about 60 or 65 in the CTE program, 192, and I need to move something. Yeah, approximately 72 in the ALE program and about 35 kids in Running Start. So our year-to-date average in the basic education program is about 1,080 kids. You can see the breakdown from September through May. It changes a little bit as we go through the year, but it is above our budget amount. If we look at the kind of the yearly progression, we are slightly above the 5-year average is what I use starting in September to kind of anticipate where we will be at the end of the year. Because as we remember, enrollment drives funding and it's based on a September through June count. So our average year to date for basic education ALE combined is a little over 1,151 FTE students. We'll probably end there. We only have the month of June left as a count month. So that's what we expect the final number to be. As we move into the financials, this is as of April 30th. We are 2/3 of the way through our school year. Again, it starts in September and goes through August. Our revenue is about 72% of budget, or 15,326,000. Expenditures are a little less than 65%, 14,644,000. And the bottom graphs are just kind of the monthly expenditure and revenue. And you can see that they're pretty similar year to year, especially in the revenue. The only month that was different is January. And again, that because our enrollment was higher than budgeted and they readjusted it at that point. If we look at our revenue and expenditures year to date, we always have two large jumps in revenue in October and April, and those are levy collections from local property taxes. So we always have in those 2 months a higher revenue to expenditure ratio than we see normally. And what I'm looking at here is really the differential from year to year in the month of April. Where are we? And normally we will see a, $2 million difference in revenue and expenditure because of the levy collection. You can see that last year we didn't have that. And we're a little better this year than we had been traditionally. So we're improving that. But again, would like to see a wider spread this time of the year between revenue and expenditure because we'll use the revenue we generate now throughout the summer. A quick look at where our funds come from. Local property taxes are very flat, about $3 million, and they have been for several years now. The local revenue is getting back to where it was before. And most of that's rental income from the community center in Langley. The state general and the state special purpose funds, those are based upon student FTE. And you can see they're up from last year, but they're still down from 4 years ago. And the concern with that is the inflation over the past few years has been, like 13%, but we're collecting less money. And again, it's based on number of students. And then the federal special purpose is up this year and last year, but that's because of ESSER funds. We'll talk about that in the budget process, about those going away. Kind of the big buckets of where does our revenue come from? You can see the majority of it is state funding, about 75%. Federal funding is larger this year than we normally see. It's usually about 4%, and the rest is local funds. On the expenditure side, it's broken down between salaries, benefits, supplies, services, and travel. About 87% of our budget is salaries and the employee benefits that go with those salaries. Just another look at those, and you can see that salaries and employee benefits are the majority of our budget, and then services follow after that, and then supplies and services are pretty consistent from year to year. So we look at it with encumbrances, and encumbrances again are those contracts we know we have to pay out. We just haven't paid yet through the end of the year. You can see that the MSOCs, which is supply, services, and travel, is about 77% of our budget year to date, or of that budget year to date. And the payroll is about 100%. So we pretty well are encumbered through the remainder of the school year. And as a total expenditure, about 97% of our budget. So there's about 3% that is not accounted for in this process. Fund balance, we do have a strong fund balance, which we will use in the budget process, and we'll talk about that. But it's a very similar pattern from year to year on where that is. Basically a breakdown of our revenue and our expenditures. You can see that year to date, we have received a little over $15.3 million. We spent about 14.6. We started with the fund balance of about 5.3, and we are currently at about almost $6 million fund balance. So it gives you that financial picture. And another way of looking at it is a balance sheet. It's just assets and liabilities comes up with the same dollar amount, and it does that by all funds. We do have other funds that we don't talk about as much, but there is a capital projects fund used for technology and buildings, not used for salaries and benefits of employees predominantly. There's about 2.5 million in there. We just got a levy collection in April. It helps bump that up. The debt service fund currently has about 85,000 in there. It does have a payment at the 1st of June, which will bring that down to almost nothing. It's an annual payment. The ASB, which is the student body fund, has a little over $91,000 in it. Transportation vehicle fund, about 151,000. Again, there won't be any activity until we get reimbursement from the federal government for the electric school bus, payment for electric school bus, and then in August, depreciation payment from the state. And the private trust fund, which is an endowment for students, is about $798,000. Any questions on the financials? Otherwise, I will jump over to the budget process. Okay, so we're looking at the budget, which is referred to as an F-195 by OSPI. It's for September of 2023 through August 31st of 2024. So it's our next fiscal school year. As we start looking at building this budget, there are several things this year that are a little different than previous years that we have to take into consideration. Enrollment loss for our district is not a new situation, but it is something that's built into the budget process. We have to understand how many students we have for funding purposes. There's also the state basic education funding model, which we've talked about, and I'll go into that in a little more detail as we talk about what effect it has on our budget. One of the big factors this year is a loss of federal funds. We received a lot of federal aid due to the pandemic, which is going away. Inflation has been higher than normal, so that affects our budget. And then we have underfunded programs also. So when I talk about the prototypical school funding model, this is a large percent of our funding that we get from the state of Washington. And for our district in particular, when they created this funding model after the McCleary decision, they created things called regionalization and experience, which is a increase or enhancement of the funding model. And for our district, it started at 24%. You can see by looking at the left side that it has decreased to 22, 20, and it's currently at 18%. And I'll explain what that means in a minute. The experience factor is because we have teachers that are high on the experience level, which normally means they're paid more money. So we've been getting more money because of that. You will see that in the coming year, that gets reduced by 2%, and the following year is totally gone. So it's a reduction in funding for that also. The federal funding, it's about $1.4 million is what we currently have in our budget this year that we will not have next year. So the programs are ending. We're spending down the balances that are there, and so we have to plan for that. Wasn't unplanned for. We knew that it was a short-term number of years that we're going to receive federal funding and it was going to go away, but it is something that we have to. What it has allowed us to do is it has allowed it to push down the budget process due to the underfunding from that prototypical school model. Even though the regionalization and the funding didn't change, we could use federal dollars to offset that. Those will be gone. The budget process, we talk about this process, it is heavily regulated and it's under RCW, which is the revised Code of Washington, which is a state law basically, that says this is how you do your budget process for school districts. It doesn't tell you how you spend your money per se, but it tells you the process we go through. The first process is that I have to have a budget available by July 10th for the public review. Drop dead, it will be here no matter what. And by August 1st, because we are considered a second-class district because of the number of kids we have, our budget has to be adopted into OSPI. So it's about a month earlier than the large districts, but that's the time frame we have to work within. And we'll on July 12th, we'll do a budget presentation. We'll talk about next year's budget, and we'll talk about a 4-year budget, so 3 years beyond that. The enrollment projections, the revenue projections, estimates, fund balance, all the things that are tied into that budget. On July
And for those following along at home or in the room, that will be a board workshop where we invite public discussion on the budget.
Correct. And we will answer questions and the whole, yes. July 26th is a budget hearing and also the budget adoption. So we need to get that done and to get to that August deadline. The budget hearing is basically the opportunity for the community. So even though it's a business meeting that night, it'll break and we'll have the opportunity for public input and they can speak about the budget in any fashion or any part of it they wish to do before we move on to the adoption process. So another opportunity for the community to be involved. There are some regulations in building a budget. The first is that we have to have a balanced budget. And that basically means that our revenue plus use of our fund balance, it would be like a savings account if you were thinking about your home budget, cannot be less than our expenditures. So we cannot have a negative fund balance at the end of the process. We also have a board policy 60/20 that requires to budget a 6% fund balance. So we can't have a 0% fund balance, we can't have a 2% fund balance. It has to be 6% of the expenditures. So whatever that ends up being. So it's all part of that process in building the budget. And then there's the typical considerations. You know, we need to look at our vision, our mission, our values, what we need to support our student learning goals. All of that is the consideration that we talk about when we start making decisions about where funds go and what programs look like and all those type of things. A little bit about the actual budget itself. We have 5 funds that we have to budget for in our budget process, and they are each a separate fund, so they don't commingle. So when we're talking about a general fund, it's a pot of money over here. Capital projects is a different bucket, that type of thing. So they each have a purpose, and we talk about those. So we'll talk about the general fund first. That's the largest fund. That's the one we spend the most time on when I do my reporting on a monthly basis. It's like, yeah, we have these funds, but this is really Yeah, this is our operating fund. This pays for salaries, it pays for utilities, it pays for insurance. It's, if you think about it, it's, you know, the fund that you'd have in your home where you would pay for all your expenditures. Roughly, it's going to be in the, you know, $21 million, whatever that revenue range is that we have, it'll be about that. It's financed from several places. It's local funds, property taxes, what we generate in the buildings, and then if there's any county funds, which there really isn't for us, but then state and federal sources. So it has a variety of places. And every school district must have a general fund. It's the one required fund that they do have to have. We also have a capital projects fund, and we have that. It's a levy funded program, and it can only be used for the improvement of buildings and for technology. Very specific, very narrow purpose of what we can use those dollars for. There's also a debt service fund, which we have a small one that is used for the repayment of bonds or loans. So if we were to get a bond of whatever dollar amount, it would go through the debt service fund and be repaid through that process. The Associated Student Body Fund is a special purpose fund that is generated by students, approved by students, and spent by students. So we are the custodians of those funds, but really not the owners of those. And there's a transportation vehicle fund, and that's for the purchase and repair of yellow school buses. And it's predominantly funded by reimbursement at the state level. When you buy a bus, they give you a reimbursement schedule over 13 years if it's a big bus, or it could be the federal grant will go through there for the electric school bus.
Mr. Pullman, if the capital projects fund could be used for the repair of roofs, why isn't it being used for the repair of roofs?
It actually is. It's used for the repair of roofs. It's used for heating systems. I think the question you might ask is, why can't we do the high school roof with the capital projects fund? We receive approximately $2 million a year. About half of that goes into technology and half of it go into capital projects. So we have $1 million a year for improvements. The size of the high school roof, roughly 150,000 square feet, is estimated to be about $7 million. So we'd have to not spend any money on building improvements over 7 years in order to pay for just that one roof. By then, inflation is going to make it $10 million. So we will never get to the point where we could do that under a levy that's $1 million a year. If you think about some of the projects, siding's another example at the high school. It's $1 million just to put up the staging around the building in order to do the work. So there's just no way that we can do things like that in bits and pieces. We have done smaller roofs. You know, we did the roof in this 10 years ago with capital projects. We do individual heatings, but it's a really big projects that require either a bond or a very large capital projects levy fund.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I'd like to ask a follow-on question. As a homeowner, I know I've experienced sticker shock when I think I'm asking for a, $7,000 roof and my bids come in from, 18 to 55,000. Would you say that the kinds of estimates we've gotten are industry standard and aren't just like curveball high estimates that our perspective?
No. As part of our bond project, we hired an architectural firm and engineers to actually provide the costing of the projects we looked at. And so that was based on a square footage for a public works job. And you realize that public works is going to cost more than the homeowner because of prevailing wages and all the requirements that are built around public agencies. But no, those are very specific dollar amounts with inflation and costs built in for unknown. You take the roof off, all of a sudden you find, damaged areas, those type things. So they are a general number, but they're a general number based upon square footage and cost per square foot in the industry today.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, so back to the budget process. When I build a budget, there's basically 5 components that I look at. And the biggest part of that is the student enrollment number. If we look at the student enrollment, it's going to drive funding. It's going to drive the needs. It's going to drive staffing. It basically is it is the steering wheel in this automobile, folks. Then we look at the revenue. We use the prototypical school funding model, and that's based on students and this formula they have in there to determine what our revenue is. We also look at staffing. How many kids do we have in first grade? How many kids do we have in ALE? How many kids do we have in whatever program it is, special education? Because that will drive the staffing needs based upon, the number of kids, the requirements in collective bargaining agreements that, affect those things. The staffing then is a big driver of the expenditure costs, because we have agreements on how much we pay people. The state tells us we have to pay retirement rates of 14.69%, FICA at 7.2, all these different numbers that we have to use to create the benefit parts of it. And then we look at the supplies and services. I will go through all the non-employee costs line by line and say, okay, what do we expect our electrical use to be compared to this year? Is there a cost increase? Oh yeah, PSE says a 3% increase. So we adjust those things. We look at our insurance and we know that it's going up by 27%. So we need to make those adjustments. So that's how we get to the expenditures. And then we look at fund balance, and fund balance is really there for cash flow. There are most months when our revenue is less than our expenditures, just the way the flow of cash comes into school districts. And there's emergencies, and also there's enrollment fluctuations. If we budget for 1,100 kids and we have 1,000 kids, we're going to have $1 million less in revenue than we had planned for. And we've already built in the expenditures and locked those in for the year. So we have to be able to absorb those type of things. Also, disclaimer, we're still working on this thing. Will until you approve it. So there will be changes. So enrollment, really, this is the kind of the cornerstone or the foundation of school funding. So we start with, where are we now? Well, we're going to be at about 1,152 FTE, and FTE is full-time equivalent. So that's a student that would go 6 hours a day at the elementary or whatever the program is. So we know what we have, and we can also see, how that progresses through the year, because we have to look at an average and not an ending amount. If I rolled it over and say, okay, we have 1,152 next year, it isn't accurate because it changes throughout the year. There's fluctuations. So there's different models of how we come up with this. We can just do a straight rollover, and I tell you that one doesn't work, and I'll show you why in a minute. We can do cohort survival. If we had 100 kids in kindergarten last year and we had 100 kids in first grade this year, we could say, okay, next year we expect the kindergarten will roll over to first grade and be the same number of kids. Never happens that way, but it's a way of doing it. We can also add more years. We can also add more weight. What happened last year was more important than 5 years ago, that type of thing. So there's lots of models. I run about 5 different models, and they all come out very similar. So then I actually just start looking at it from a practical standpoint of, what makes sense. So really, it's the historical information that I use to look at where we're going, okay? And you can see as a district, in the 80s and 90s, we were a growing district. We hit 2000, and all of a sudden, something changed in the environment in South Woodby, and we started to have fewer kids here. And that has continued for the last 23 years. So like I say, it's not a new story when we talk about enrollment loss. You'll hear these stories in all these big districts across states saying, oh gosh, enrollment, we lost kids and they didn't come back. And well, we've been dealing with this. So that's not a new one for us. It's not a curveball really, but it does help us get to what's our estimates for next year, because that's what we need to build a budget. So when I talked about that straight rollover, you can see that, the roughly 116 kids that were in 10th grade in 2021, well, they weren't there the following year. And we know that's because of Running Start. Every year we have a certain number of kids between their sophomore and junior year go off to Running Start. I can go back 30 years and it's the same pattern every single year. Number changes a little, but it's 10, 15, used to be 25 kids when we had more. The other thing is we can look at our graduating class, roughly 92 kids, expecting 65 to come in. There's a 30 FTE difference between those. So just those things alone, without all the other changes we see in historical projections, tells us that there's a good 40 difference in there, which is about what we're budgeting, from 1,079 to about 1,039. So it starts getting those numbers. And then we look at them by building. So how many kids are going to be in this building? Because that's going to drive a lot of the needs, not just classroom teacher needs, but what other supports do they need in the building? So in this building, we're looking at 422 FTE in the middle school, 254 in the high school, 363. So that's a 1,039 that we're looking at in the basic education program. We also have other programs. You know, I have to do special education. So there's a calculation for that. And we're looking at about 172 for next year. And you can see that it correlates with our enrollment numbers. As we have fewer kids in the general district, we also have fewer kids in special ed. Doesn't always do that. Sometimes we'll have more kids. You know, right now we have 190 for the month of May in there. So it changes through the year, but it's the projection we'll use for funding purposes. And that's what these are all for, the funding calculations. Running Start, about 33 kids. We don't actually receive funding for Running Start. It comes to us, it goes to the community college, but we have to budget for it. Our CTE program at the high school, currently about 68 kids. We're expecting 67 next year, similar to where we've been for the last couple of years. And then we look at what our total enrollment is for this year to calculate what is our LAP funding, our learning assistance program. It's based upon current year enrollment. So it's just another number we have to come up with. ALE program, currently about 72. This includes what we do here, but also what we do with Spokane Virtual Academy. And so we're looking at about 67 with that combination of those two next year. And it basically has to do with the 8th grade change in there through the year. So again, these are for funding purposes. We create these FTEs based on our best guess at this particular time to plug into this prototypical school funding model to create our revenue projections. The one thing I do have to tell you about this is that we create these budget estimates in this budget process, and OSPI will start funding us based on our estimates from September through December. Come January, they will actually look at September through January enrollment actual, and they will recalculate how much money we received. That may go up, it may go down. So we want to be careful that we don't overestimate enrollment, because we come January, they're going to take money away from us. And then they continue to adjust that every month until we get to the month of June. And once we get to June, we know how much money we received for the previous 9 months. So it's a kind of an odd process, but it's the way they work. So it's really critical that we really fine tune enrollment as much as possible and not overestimate and be overly optimistic about our numbers. So like I mentioned before, student enrollment drives state funding. So it's really the important part of what we look at when we look at this. And the way it works is that there is a dollar amount assigned to each of these categories. Basic education, special education, those are still estimates as I work through the process. But you see that roughly you get about $10,800 for a child in a basic education program. If they're in special education, they get the $10,800 plus another $10,676. So they get both of those as long as they're in district. The ALE program is about $95.55, and the vocational CTE program is about $11,269. So for every student we have or don't have, it correlates to a dollar amount. So what state apportionment does is it takes the number of students, calculates these things, and provides funding for these things only: basic education, special education, our learning assistance program, bilingual, and highly capable. It doesn't calculate any funding for food service or some of the, any other program that we have, athletics, whatever. So it's very specific in what the state considers their responsibility for funding. And this is what they fund. Talking about staffing units, it's part of the prototypical school funding model. Is based on the number of students, they calculate a number of staffing units that we are funded for. Has nothing to do with the number that we have, has nothing to do with how much we pay people. It's just a formula. And it will look something like this. This needs to be updated a little bit, but if you have 400 kids in an elementary, they will fund 1.253 principals and a 0.493 guidance counselor and that type of thing. So it creates a funding mechanism where it creates a total number of units that they do a calculation with.
For those following along at home or in the room, I would like to call out that health services number. That would be less, yeah, 1 day a week.
Half a day a week.
Half a day a week for health services in the entire district. That's what state funding provides. This is why the prototypical school model needs to be updated badly.
Yeah, and this is not what you see in school districts. you just don't see these numbers. You know, if you think about the fact that, you know, basically 1.7 custodians in a building this size, or, you know, in the high school, you'd have even less custodians. So it's not practical at all. They also break down their classifications in their at OSBI with certificated instructional staff, classified staff, and certificated administrative staff. And the importance of that is they fund them at different levels. So they create a number of employees in each of these groups, and then they fund them at a dollar amount. So if we look at what that means, it's again a funding allocation. But if you look at the amount that is funded for the last 3 years in each of those classifications, you see it basically didn't change. So that's that regionalization effect that went down. So if inflation increased by 2%, regionalization went down by 2%, we didn't receive any more funding, even though we were paying more money because of the inflation cost. Current year is a little bit better. It's 5.5% for the inflation, but still a negative 2% for regionalization. So we didn't realize a 5.5% increase, even though people received that in increases. 23-24, the regionalization will stay the same, but the experience factor on certificated staffing will be a reduction. So we're not going to see the full 3.7% in there. So students create the number of staffing units times these dollar amounts creates our funding. So we talk about revenue. In the general fund, we really have 5 main courses of funding in here. First, it's the property taxes. And then we have locally generated funds. We have state apportionment and state funding for categorical programs, which are FTE based, and then our federal funding. And you can see that 76% of the funds comes from the state through apportionment based on FTE. So that's the main part of what we get. About 20% is local, 17% of that is property taxes, 3% is generated in the building, and about 4% is federal, which is less than half of what we see in the current year. So you see that going down. We talk about the local, it's now referred to as an enrichment levy, and it pays for things that the state doesn't fund. And that's quite a few things. You know, if you think about your athletic program, student travel costs, the staff that aren't funded, you know, if we have 80 teachers and they only fund 70 of them, we're picking up the difference. Or if we pay our teachers more than the amount, that $88,000, we're picking up the difference. So that's done there. Underfunded MSOCs, material supplies, other costs. If you think about it, the amount we get basically pays for our utilities and our insurance and nothing else. So we're picking up all those other costs of paper and supplies and et cetera. We support our food service program. So that comes out of local levy. Pupil transportation is not fully funded, so we do that. And I think we negotiate, you know, healthcare increases, paid leave, you know, state mandates 12 days of sick leave. They don't pay sick leave for classified staff. They only pay for 4 days for certificated staff. So there's a lot of things that we pick up that come out of the local levy. So when McCleary came down, it changed the local levy. So now by state law, we can collect the lesser of, not the greater, but the lesser of $2.50 per thousand of assessed value or a amount per student. And that amount was set at $2,500 in 2020, and now it's $2,988.32. So if we could do the assessed value, which is $7.1 billion, our levy could be $17,892,974. It'd cover our entire budget predominantly. We can't do that because it's not the lesser. So we end up with $3,553,112, which is $1 million less than we received 4 years ago in our local levy. The voters approved 3.5 million because we anticipated it was going down and didn't ever anticipate we'd see 8.9 CPI created artificially by the state, which would allow us to get to that amount. But anyways, we look at the levies, and levies are over 2 calendar years. So we're looking at the 23 calendar year, January to December.
I'm just going to ask you to clarify something because I had a question today from a community member, and I thought it was worth clarifying. The difference between the per thousand on a levy versus the 2,500. For example, our parks get per thousand, but we're limited. So, so could you speak to the difference?
Yes. Yeah, school districts ask for a certain amount of money. So $3.5 million. As the value of property goes up, the rate per thousand that is paid towards that 3.5 million goes down. So we anticipate 3.5 million at an assessed value of $6 billion is going to be 50 cents. Well, assessed value goes up, and now it's 43 cents per thousand. So we don't receive more money. We receive exactly what we asked for. Junior taxing districts that are based on a rate per thousand. So if you have 15 cents per thousand, as the value goes up, you collect more money because it's tied to the value of the property. It'd be nice if we were in that boat, but we're stuck with that lesser of, which is the per pupil amount. And as we get smaller each year, even though inflation increases the per student amount, it's less students that we can count. So that's why we see a levy that's basically staying at that same range for a period of time. So calendar years, so we are collecting from the 23 year and 24. So it's the fall collection of 2023, and it will be the spring collection of 2024. So you do a combination of those two, and it comes out to $3,459,023. And we are limited by the state. That is the maximum that we will be able to collect. And you can see it's about 3.4 million roughly, with a little bit of fluctuation, but we're going up, less than $11,000 in there. And if you look at the inflation rate, CPI at 8.9%, we're probably less than 0.5%, increase in there. So the levy is not keeping up with inflation. I guess that's the message, is that we're already spending it for all these things, but it's not increasing as everything else increases on the expenditure side. Then we have the local funds, things that are generated at the building level, donations. We get money from the school foundation or whoever might donate money, rental fees of our facilities, and that predominantly is going to be Bayview and the community center. If you are a student who pays for your lunch, that's collected locally. Any fees, sales, resale of goods, and investments. Luckily, investments are going up because interest rates are going up. So we're getting more money on the money we have invested with the treasurer. Those are all local things, and it doesn't change much from year to year. The biggest change is that, currently we're not operating a driver's education program. Don't anticipate that for the coming year, so I won't budget for that. And I'm anticipating more revenue from the community center as it becomes more fully engaged in its business. So about 545,000, and it's, has basically, other than we shut down for a year, it was basically about that dollar amount. Then we get into state apportionment. Again, it's students times the staffing ratio comes up with the amount that we're funded for. And what does that look like? Well, this year it's 12,491,000. We're looking at 12,136,000, or about $354,000 less in the coming year. Again, tied to FTE, so fewer kids. You think about it, at $10,000 per student, 40 kids is about $400,000. A little bit of change because of inflation decreases that. You also see that there's a slight change between basic ed and special ed. There's a percentage that is used each year based upon the number of special ed kids we have to basic ed kids that reallocates funds. And that has gone up by 2%. So that means that special ed will collect a little more next year than they did this year based on the same number of kids. Also, you see that the state special education number goes from 1.8 million to about 2 million. And that's because they have raised the capacity to 15%. And so we're going to collect for a few more kids that we weren't able to collect funding on in the previous year. So a little more money there. The one that has a drop is transportation reimbursement. And I can't give you an exact number on this because the state uses this regression model on an Atari that they bought in, no, I'm serious. They even admit this, and they don't understand how the program works. But it takes number of students that ride, the number of miles in your district, the number of stops, the number of all these things, and comes out with a dollar amount. But my anticipation is that in a single bus run, we're going to be driving half the number of miles. We're going to have half the number of stops because we're only going to come here once instead of twice. And then I'm seeing a lower ridership in the spring numbers than I saw, in the fall and last winter. I think the last numbers were in the 750 range. 2 years ago, we were at like 1,200 kids, and in the fall we were over 1,000. So there's 3 counts in there. So I'm anticipating it's going to be less. I just don't have an exact number, but I think it will probably be, quite a bit less. Anyways, so what we see is that revenue at the state level about the same as where we are today. So not a big change in the state funding based upon enrollment numbers. Federal is where we see the big drop. That top part, the ones that blocked out, those are the federal ESSER funds that we will have expended by the end of August and won't have for next year in our budget, about $1.4 million. The ones in the bottom are the typical federal funds we receive, IDA, special education, title programs, et cetera. I don't know what those are exactly. They don't come out until July, but they're going to be relative to where we are today. They may be a little less because of the number of kids, but they might also bounce back because our free and reduced is up 2% from previous years. And that ties into there a little bit, but very similar. But we're usually about 900,000 roughly from year to year in those federal funds. And again, categorical, used for very specific purposes, cannot be used for general purpose things. So if we look at the summary, we tie it all together, we're looking at about $20.2 million in the coming year, which is about 1.7 million less than what we currently are receiving. So it is a large reduction in funding. I also budget $100,000. That's a revenue neutral type thing. There's a revenue and expenditure. If we get the money, we can spend it. If we don't get the money, we don't spend it. But it saves us having to go back and do a budget extension process where we have to have a formal meeting and all those things. So it gives me a little bit of leeway if we get an extra grant or something that comes in. So anyways, you're looking at revenue that's about $20.2 million. And now we have to look on the expenditure side of it, the salaries, benefits, et cetera, and see how that matches up and how much fund balance. And I know we will use some fund balance because we can't get expenditures down that low in 1 year. So that'll be the next conversation we have is, okay, here's the expenditures and here's how much fund balance we need in order to cover that. What I have for you today.
Comprehensive as always, which I know some people see this as something that's utterly opaque, and it really is when you start looking at it, but I have really appreciated having this full view of it so I can learn about the process and what it means. It's been very helpful for me, so thank you very much.
Well, it's important for you to understand the process, because when we talk about expenditures, that's really where we're talking about program. Where are we putting our money? And you need to have the understanding of why we are going where we're going.
Which is a whole nother hour-and-a-half presentation for the expenditure side, which is why it's in bite size, right? So all you learned about tonight was what we anticipate in our revenue. So the hard part comes next meeting.
I just really appreciate the visibility that you give us as board members and also the public into why these numbers look so austere and the many factors that are all piling on to school districts, not limited to our own at this time. So thank you. It's tough facts, but you share them really clearly in a way that helps us understand.
Some questions to look forward to for the expenditures, both in the interest of time and to not put you on the spot when expenditures are still under construction. Consider these things I would like to see for the second half of this presentation. First of all, I'd like to see ways in which we're doubling down on programs that are helping our district meet our goals and cutting our losses in areas that we've proven that investments are not furthering student outcomes. In which ways we got stakeholder input other than the workshop itself, which will be a great opportunity for community input, but in other way, have there been other ways in which input from other stakeholders was received? And then lastly, as always, in what ways is our spending reflecting our values as a district, since our budget really is an expression of our values. So thank you so much. There's no one I would rather have in charge of our finances during a difficult time like this. I really appreciate it.
Thank you very much, Mr. Pullman. We'll move on to our student board members report. Audrey and Katya.
Thank you. First of all, we have a new student rep, so I'd like to welcome Carter McKnight onto our little panel here. I'm going to have a fun time working with him next year, and although I'll miss Audrey, I'm excited to see where Carter will take the position and the role. So at the high school, we've had spring sports. We have 3 teams at state this week. Girls and boys golf was at state earlier this week, I believe, but they might still be competing today. Girls and boys track left today, so we had a little state send off for them during 4th period, which is always fun to see. And girls tennis leaves for state tomorrow, so it's really cool to see so many people qualifying this year. Baseball, softball, and soccer all had great seasons, but unfortunately didn't make it to state. The senior countdown is up, and I believe they have about 10 days, it might be less now, of school left. So those seniors are counting that down. And graduation is June 10th. So they're all looking forward to that. We had prom a little over a week ago, and there's a good turnout. The theme was bubbles and bow ties. So everyone got little bubbles to blow around. And Rainbow Prom was this past weekend, and that was put on by Queer and Trans Club. And that was by donation. So it was also really cool to see the turnout to that. ASB had elections in the past month, and we found out results. So we have a new set of officers for the next year, and we're excited to see where ASB is going to go. It's kind of changed over the past year, and the students kind of have more control of the direction. So next year, it's going to be cool now that we have a foundation to kind of build that up. School year is wrapping up, and all the classes are kind of finishing everything, finishing the projects, turning everything in, just having a good end of the year, which is super fun. A few things, the students still have concerns over the water, the drinking fountains, the color and the flavor. It doesn't really taste like water, and the color is sometimes brown or discolored. So there's a lot of concerns over that, especially with sports. And the lack of AC on hot days and having to open the doors, which then becomes a safety issue if all the doors are open to the school. So that's for the high school.
And then, yeah, just really kind of exciting to see the school year kind of wind down and how it kind of like changes the culture of the school a little bit the closer you get to summer. Another thing I'd like to point out is like discussions around the bond, because now it's pretty well known that the bond did not pass. So a lot of students are wondering, what are the next steps and like, how can we get our school to the environment that it needs to be? And then at the middle school, Katya and I talked to a few middle schoolers today. We're sitting out in the park waiting for middle school track. So Cougar leaders are bringing the current 5th and 6th graders to the high school building next year. So kind of just prepping for that and that really big transition. There's also been some end of school dances and assemblies being planned and just wrapping up activities and ending the year with a bang. Track is still going on. Like we said, there's a lot of students that kind of hang out after school in the park prior to track. A lot of students are participating in sports, which is really great to see, especially with this nice weather. One frustration that some students shared with us today was not being able to stay on school campus after school between sports. I believe this was brought up in the fall, but it was reiterated today as well. A few other concerns were a later start time, which we'll hopefully get next year. But again, that was a concern. And then more field trips as well. They discussed the 8th grade Adventure Ed trip that's taking place a couple years ago, and just like having maybe something that will resemble that in the future. They also discussed electives. They discussed a lot of the great electives they have now, and a few ideas for some more in the future as well. I guess ending that, we unfortunately do not have a report for elementary school tonight, but this is a bittersweet. I'm trying not to cry, but I might. This is my last meeting as a student board rep, and this has just meant so much to me. It's really like paved my passion and interest and what I want to do in the future. I want to thank the board for this opportunity and serving as the first second student board member on our school board, as well as like making tremendous progress in elevating student voice in our district, whether it be through advisory votes, going down to the National School Board Association, and presenting to our entire country about how we can involve students more in their own education and making decisions. This is not my first time I've been at a board meeting, I can confirm. So I just want to thank the board so much and putting so much into this role and just being able to see it grow, whether it be like having discussions with elementary school students about the new clubs they're forming, or talking to advisors at the high school. It's just been so great to engage with students and be able to not only serve as a student board member, but a representation of students' voices as their constituents of our district, and what they gain in their times they spend in this district will shape their entire future. And it is so important, our role we play in student lives. I guess the core belief I have is that like education is at the root of systemic change. I shared this in a speech I gave in front of the vice president back in October, but just education is so important, and it is our duty to give students the best education possible. So thank you.
As you can see, Carter, you've got some big shoes to fill.
And Audrey will be back on June 14th, which is our next meeting, so that we can actually celebrate her and provide her with a proper send off. And I do have to applaud as another woman who can cry in public, being able to talk through it is a skill. And I applaud you for that. So you are an amazing, you have set the standard. So you've got colleagues here that have to live up to that.
I want to give some major props to the folks who put on the Rainbow Prom. I had the opportunity to chaperone that, and it was amazing. Like, the students were just having such a good time from everything I could see, and it was just put on beautifully, and was an amazing experience for me to get to be there helping make sure that they had the refreshments they needed, and dancing my shoes off too. The question about the start time, yes, we will have changed start times next year. That's been one of the main things I've heard in my visits to the high school about students wanting. So I'm really happy that we're able to have some movement there. So that's fantastic. And the bond next steps, our next meeting, our next school board meeting, we'll be discussing the next steps with the bond and where we go after we had an election where we had 1,201 more yes votes than no votes. And yet we still came 129 votes short of the constitutionally required 60% plus one. Thank you both for the report. Are there any comments or questions for our student representatives?
Kind of surreal that you're not going to be with us anymore. So if you want to run for public office, it's pretty fun.
Okay, thank you both. We'll move on to superintendent's report. Motion.
I'll try and live up to the student report. So a couple things. Yes, in terms of the bond and next steps, the board has that on their agenda for June 14th, as well as celebrating Audrey. We will be talking about, the board will be talking about what it wants to do with its bond and next steps around that. Christy, if you could bring up the two slides that I have for tonight. One, the first thing is the required annual review of policy 3123, which is the withdrawal of students prior to graduation. So I'll provide that report to the board. And the other thing I want to share with the board are the program requirements that we have to live up to. So first things first, withdrawal prior to graduation. We have to indicate to the board our 12th graders who left prior to graduation. And as you can see from this report, We had one who graduated early, two actually who graduated early, and several who left for other places, like Atlantic Coast High School, Jacksonville, Florida. So again, this report is required. So we had 10 students who left prior to graduation this year. Go to the next one, Christy. This one, this is a handout that I thought was something the board might appreciate having in its back pocket. So this outlines a report that I had to provide to OSPI on our compliance with basic education. So it starts with what's mandatory and required, and you wonder, what is the difference between mandatory and required? Mandatory is by law, required is by OSPI. So we are required by law that students have a 180-day school year. Now you can get a waiver for that. Some districts have, they operate, say, 4 days a week, 10 hours a day. So you can get a waiver, but in essence, you have to provide 180 school days, and the minimum instructional hours are, we do an average, which is 1,027, average K-12. You have to do 1,000 for kindergarten, and then it goes up from there. But we run on an average, which does not include our early release time. So when we have this early release time, we have to establish that we've still had the minimum number of hours. So we do that. It's required that each student have a high school and beyond plan, which is something that starts in 7th grade that our counselors work on with every student. So that is required. It's also required that it is electronic. Interesting tidbit, Skyward did away with providing it electronically, and Skyward is our provider. So that was a little panic in John's voice when he called me to say, okay, now what do we do? So that they figured it out. Credit and subject area graduation requirements. Our district goes beyond the minimum of 24 credits. We provide an opportunity for 32 and require students to have 30 credits for graduation. And we are also required to provide the minimum college entrance requirements and the graduation pathways, which I shared with the board, the different ways that our students can graduate besides just passing the requisite assessments that happen in various grade levels. There are other ways to graduate. Those things are also required by policy. And you'll be happy to know that I cross-checked to make sure we had every policy in place, and we do. So that was good news. Required. Here's where it starts to get really interesting. Now we're required to provide training in CPR for all of our students. We do that. AIDS prevention education. We've been doing that for many years. It's required that they have at least one opportunity for arts instruction at the high school. It's required that they have an opportunity for a computer science course. That is an elective, an online course that students can take. It's the opportunity, not the requirement that they take it. We teach about conservation, natural resources, and environmental learning standards K-12. So that is something that we meet. Disabilities history and awareness, that's in March. We do that. Financial aid advising day, 1 day. Interesting. We actually go beyond that. So students learn about financial aid. Veterans Day, it's required we observe Veterans Day. It's required that we have social emotional learning standards and benchmarks. And as you know, we used our culture of care work this year to head toward meeting those standards and benchmarks. Standalone civics course, we do that. That's CWP. It's a senior level course. Temperance and Good Citizenship Day and voter registration. Again, required that we provide that for students. And in that CWP course, they study the Constitution, right? Oh, wait for it. The notification, it's required that we provide notification on these issues, that students can accelerate academically. We have opportunities in the high school handbook where students can challenge courses, meet mastery. Comprehensive sexual education, we hear lots about that. We provide that and we provide opt-out and people are able to review the material. Since time immemorial, curriculum is about our Native American heritage and making sure that that's included in instruction. We actually have this provided, but we are not under the mandate yet because it comes into play when you renew your social studies curriculum, which hasn't come up since this became law. Credit for students released from institutional facilities, we have that, it's board policy. Financial aid standards that students have to meet, that's also in the high school. And here it is, the electronic platform for the high school and beyond plan, which through no fault of our own was removed, and then we've got a replacement. So the encouraged, they say encouraged, but if you don't have it, they come back. This goes through the state Board of Education. They come back and say, why don't you have this? Even though it's encouraged. So we have ethnic studies. We teach about the history of civil rights and the Holocaust. The next one is new. And it's very interesting to me that we are now required to provide at least one day of instruction in awareness of bone marrow donation. Well, it's just an interesting thing. I mean, if you talk about, again, I don't know where it came from. I'm just speculating, but somebody in someone's family, there was some issue that brought this to the forefront. So we're prepared. And Seal of Biliteracy is the opportunity for students to learn to proficiency a second language. So again, this is your handy dandy pocket companion of what's required in a school district. And I want you to know I submitted the report to the state education or OSPI. And we should hear in June that we are in compliance. So. And you thought only Dan could tell you all the things about what the district's doing. Okay. That would be all I have for the superintendent's report this evening.
Thank you very much. We'll move on to our board comments or reports. Anything from board members who'd like to mention anything?
I'll keep it quick. Since the last board meeting, I went to the middle school. I actually got a firsthand view of the new ELA curriculum while I was in pilot. And as always, I'm just really amazed with how the school is going and the energy of the teachers and the engagement of the students. I got a lot of really great questions about the bond and just about what's happening at the board level. Someone called the board ASB for old people. I thought that was probably the best description I've ever heard. But yeah, just I'm just always impressed by our teachers every time I visit the school. I want to thank Brooke for at the beginning of public comment for really articulating our values of how we treat each other respectfully. I would love to see that be that longer explanation be a regular part of our meeting, so it's extremely clear to everybody what we expect when they step up to the mic. So thank you for that, and thank you, Audrey, for an amazing service. You really set the model for what a student board rep can achieve, and it was just been really amazing working with you. And Carter, I'm looking forward to working with you now that your term has started. So thank you for applying, and yeah, I'm interested to see what you bring and your unique skills and strengths. And I want to thank the parents who spoke up about ALE. I'll recognize my bias as the parent of an ALE student, but it does occur to me that as the instructional hours decrease, it does increase equity issue where only parents who are able to have the privilege to take time off of work to be a partner in their students' education will be a fit for that program. So thank you for bringing that to our attention.
I would just like to say, I guess I probably should have mentioned this earlier in the student report. I'm just super thrilled to see where Carter will take the student rep position on the board and the future of the board as well. I think I'm excited. I'm sitting in the audience, watching Katya and Carter present their student board report, and I'm just so excited. Cyril will take them. I think Carter do a really great job.
Thank you very much. We'll adjourn the meeting and go into executive session to discuss to review the performance of a public employee. Thank you. I couldn't remember the exact wording. This meeting is now adjourned. Thank you and good night.